Hi, everyone. I hope you're doing well today. So, we're going to start our unit on philosophy of religion. This video is just going to serve as a very brief sort of introduction to the unit. So, we'll introduce what is philosophy of religion. Then I'll introduce a view that I'm going to refer to as traditional theism. Then we'll talk about some common kinds of arguments that people give for God's existence. So, philosophy of religion is an area of philosophy that deals with philosophical questions both about and within religions. So you can sort of take a sort of philosophical perspective where you're sort of outside the religion, sort of looking in, or you can say, well, let's assume that this religion is sort of correct. Well, what kinds of philosophical questions come up within it to sort of make sense of what it's even sort of saying? So here's some examples of the kinds of questions that might be discussed within philosophy of religion. So from outside of religion, you might ask, well, what makes something a religion? We see all these different kinds of religions. There's Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, Islam, Judaism. All of those are religions, but what do they have in common? What makes each of them a religion as opposed to something else? So a lot of religions appeal to this idea of faith. Well, what exactly is faith? How should we make sense of that idea? And what's the relationship between people's faith and their reason? So that would be a question that comes up sort of within religion. Is there any evidence for or against God's existence? How should we understand religious disagreement? Do our words mean the same thing when they are used to describe God as when we use them to describe a human being? So when someone says that God knows something, and when someone says that say Sam knows something, is the word knows being used in the same way? All right, now, there's a whole lot of different ways that you can sort of create a framework for thinking about philosophical issues about religion. Given where our focus is going to be, I'm going to set up a framework that distinguishes between three views, just because this is helpful for our particular purposes. If you had other purposes, it might be helpful to make sort of slightly different distinctions. But so we'll distinguish between theism. This is the belief that there exists a personal God or gods. Atheism, which is the belief that God does not exist. Then agnosticism, which says basically it's the psychological state of withholding belief one way or the other. So it remains neutral. Now, like I said, there's a lot of other interesting views, such as deism. There's epistemic versions of agnosticism. But the division between these three, as I said, will serve our purposes. Now, theism comes in different forms, and many theists disagree about which version is best. Our focus is going to be on sort of traditional versions of theism, where these include some common theistic beliefs that have been held throughout largely Western history in many of the most influential sort of Western religions. So Judaism, Islam, Christianity, the big three there for the Western religions. So some important notes here. There are many non-theistic and Eastern religions that are just as important as these and just as influential. Our focus on these sort of traditional theistic beliefs is largely due to three circumstantial reasons. So reasons that just happen to be true about our situation. First, we have limited time. This is not a philosophy of religion course, so we're not giving a sort of deep overview, a broad overview of all the different sort of religions. Now, these religions are likely the ones that are most familiar to students within the United States, and so they offer an easier entry point into practicing philosophical reflection on religion. Because this isn't a religious studies course, this is an attempt to engage in those philosophical skills. And religion is just a topic that gives us maybe a focus for engaging those skills. Now, also, these religions are a highly influential aspect of life within our society, so within the United States. So anybody who lives within the United States, these have a very big influence over their interactions with other people just within our society. And that's largely just due to the fact of where we live. So those are the reasons we're focused on here, not because these views are any more important or anything like that. These are just facts about our situation for why we're focusing in this way. All right, so traditional theism. Traditional theism, this is the belief in the existence of exactly one God that's responsible for creating the universe and everything in it. including human beings. And that God is a certain kind of person. That person is omnipotent, all-powerful, omniscient, all-knowing, and omnibenevolent, all good, morally perfect. So if you're having any difficulty remembering those words, so potent, think potent means strong or powerful. There's a potent smell. So omniscient kind of looks like science at the end there. Think science, knowing, so all-knowing. Then benevolent, bene, means good, and so all good. So one issue in philosophy of religion is just, for those religions that do believe in such a God, what reason is there to believe that that's true? Now, there's the question of, well, look, even if there's no sort of evidence in favor of it, maybe you need to believe it on the basis of faith. That's an issue that we're just not going to sort of engage in. We're going to ask this question, sort of, is there evidence that could be used to show that a God likely exists or doesn't exist? Now, throughout history, there have been a number of strategies that people have used to try to show that it's likely that God exists. Some common kinds of arguments that have been used are ontological arguments, cosmological arguments, teleological or design arguments, and moral arguments. All these arguments argue for the same conclusion, they just differ in the evidence they try to provide. Ontological arguments appeal to the fact that we have an idea of God as evidence that God exists. So just like I have the idea of a unicorn, even though I don't believe that unicorns exist in reality, even an atheist can admit that they have an idea of God, even though they don't believe that God exists in reality. Well, according to these arguments, they say, look, there's something special about the idea of God, such that just the mere fact that the idea of God exists in our mind can be used to derive the conclusion that God must exist outside our mind in reality as well. Cosmological arguments, they appeal to the fact that there's a universe at all as evidence that God exists. The idea is the fact that something exists rather than nothing can show that God exists. Teleological arguments say, well, when we look at the kind of something that exists, when we look at the kind of universe we live in, it looks like our universe has a number of things that are designed for specific purposes. And that gives evidence of God's existence. Moral arguments, they appeal to the fact or this idea that there's an objective morality. The idea is there's truths about what is right and what's wrong. Well, where do those moral rules come from? They can't come from people because we're imperfect. So we don't have the authority to create morality. And so morality must have been created by God. Now, that's just a sketch of these different kinds of arguments. To make them work, well, the devil, so to speak, is in the details. We, in this course, will look at two of these arguments in more detail. We will look at cosmological arguments, and we'll look at a teleological argument as well. Anyways, we'll start that in the next video. See you then. Bye-bye.